All right, so we are here. I have been Maid. I'm Alex, here with Nick Vaky.
Hello, hello.
And we're both back in Taiwan recently. Actually, Nick is still living here. I've moved back to the U.S. recently in the last year or so, but I came back here. I've been here for about a month, and Nick and I were talking about, the film and so forth. We've been still getting a lot of invites to go to different screenings, and we'll get some reporters asking us a lot of questions from time to time again, and we're kind of just talking about the whole film in general, and kind of hey, do you want to just kind of recap and see what where we're at with everything and where the film has gone, kind of what the whole quote unquote I don't know if you want to really call it a movement per se, but just the whole kind of nature of the film, because a lot of it was so activist based, and a lot of it we kind of invited to do a lot of NGO stuff and working with people who are working towards policy reform, and just kind of doing a recap of what our experience has been throughout that process and what the film has kind of turned into, or where it's kind of gone and so forth. So we also thought it'd be cool just to kind of talk about how it got going and look at what the background behind it was too, just because a lot of people, that's one of the things that people always ask us at screenings.
Right.
You know what I mean? How did you guys get into this? What was your purpose? And why did you do that?
Or even just the basic thing of how did you guys meet?
Right.
That kind of stuff. Yeah.
So I thought, it'd just be cool. We'll do a podcast, just kind of, just chat about our experience. And so the easy answer is, so Nick and I both met at Jumda, otherwise known as
NCCU.
Yeah, represent.
Alma mater.
And I was thinking the other day, I can't remember what the name of that class was. All I know is that
we both dropped out though.
Yes, we did. That class was very bizarre. But we met. I think we sat next to each other during the class. We were just. I remember. No, I remember very clearly, you sitting next to me, and the whole time we were just listening. We both had these looks in our eyes.
Yeah.
What the hell is this guy talking about?
Yeah, that was definitely my vibe in that class. I remember not knowing the reason I can't remember what class it was, because I remember not knowing what he was talking about and what we were supposed to do. I was just I can't take this class because I have no idea what's going on.
Exactly. And I remember then we walked out and we were chatting. We're hey, so what do you think of the class? I think we were both trying to wrap our heads around. Okay, was it me?
Yeah.
Did I just not get it? Was this something else too that you didn't get? And I think we had a beer or something, and we just exchanged numbers. And I remember you mentioned that you were into film and so forth. And I think we hung out maybe a few times, afterwards, or
a couple times.
Yeah, but I don't think the idea of ever wanting to do a film came up right away. I think it came I was doing my thesis shortly afterwards. So basically, I Have It Made was the name of my master's thesis, and I had started writing a lot of content. I was doing a lot of interviews. I was also working in radio at the time, and I was doing a lot of different interviews, just in general, not so much about the this migrant worker topic at all by any means, but I had a mic. I figured, it'd be cool to maybe get some of the stuff on audio, the interviews that I'm doing. But then I also thought, gosh, how cool would it be to turn my thesis also into something beyond just a piece of paper that gets thrown into a library and that also, just no one ever reads again, and then this type thing. And And I remember Nick said, he was really interested in film and so forth too, and we had kind of been talking a lot about different foreigner topics and so forth. And so I remember, I think we met up one time and then started talking about it, and I think we said something hey, do.
Yeah. I think you had proposed it at first as just helping you film the different interviews that you had to do for the thesis.
Yeah.
Kind of for posterity, but also then we could use it to make a bigger thing later. Mm-hmm. And I remember at the time when you presented it to me, I was kind of looking for any kind of project. I was in the mode of just I'll take on any project that sounds a little bit interesting, and then offers me a chance to kind of practice my craft, right?
Yeah.
And and then we kind of just, I feel I remember the vibe of it was just we just kind of just jumped in and just did it.
Yeah.
There wasn't, I mean, it sounds bad, but it's not a bad thing, I don't think.
No.
We just were no, let's just go for it. We just went and we just started doing it. And it wasn't a lot of necessarily planning about how this was going to be a movie right away, right? It was just we have these interviews set up, so let's just do them, and then we can worry about making a movie kind of later.
Yeah.
And that was, what year was that? Do you remember?
Yeah, so I was trying to think about that.
I want to say 2013.
Yeah, I almost thought it was also 2012.
It might even have been 2012, actually, yeah.
Because I remember we had the screening, our first screening was in March of 2014.
Right.
Or was it January? It was like early.
January.
Yeah, January, excuse me. Because I know we released it then later in August, and then there was a period of time. And I think the whole process, took us about 2 years. I won't even say, we might have even started in like late 2011 or early 2012.
That might have been true. Yeah, you're right.
Because going through the time of which we started just like, these interviews, I think we took, like we were gone at different times and so forth, and we'd come back to it. And then as we had all that content, we realized, holy shit, like we have a lot of, this could be like a full film. Like we could really tell a story if we wanted to.
Actually, that's a good question I have. Is when was the moment when you thought, okay, this could be a full film?
Ooh,
I know mine.
I think it was around the time maybe when we were at Taiwan interviewing that professor.
Okay.
Just because her name, I can't think of her name at the moment. Shoot, she's such a prominent figure in this topic. But
right.
That NTU professor, sorry, I can't remember your name. It was a very long conversation, and she really went in depth. And I thought, okay, this could be like a main like type of person that's underlying kind of the theme and explaining it very coherently and so forth. But I think maybe that was the point. I can't really think of anything.
For me, it was when we met Vaky and we interviewed Vaky. Actually.
Okay.
So like we did that interview with Vaky, which is kind of, it's in the middle of the film. It's the one where she talks about the abuse and the runaway and that stuff like that. And I remember when we interviewed her and when we got that one, I was like, okay, this should be a longer thing, because her story was so it was intense, and it was everything we were talking about, kind of like in a broad terms, but in a specific incident. I just remember thinking like, oh, this is like, it didn't really hit home how like human the whole thing was until I heard her story.
Yeah, so. I agree. And I remember, you did mention that too, and I was like, that's a really good idea. Like you said, like there's something about the way her story unfolded that everything else seemed to kind of build off of that.
I feel like her story kind of encapsulated, like, it sucks for her, but it's like all the bad things that were happening, just like they all happened to her, and it was all, you could kind of see all the problems with the system through her one story. So.
And we met her, we actually went to a shelter. So part of one of our times that we filmed is we went to that shelter.
That was like one of the first, I think.
That was one of the first, yeah. We met several people there. Like if you watch the movie, you'll see this person and she's talking about sleeping on the floor and so forth. That was one of the clips that we used in the trailers. And then we met her there as well. And for some reason, she just like really opened up to us a lot more, I felt like. And then was willing to be interviewed a lot more afterwards, and I believe at that point she technically had just ran away from her employer.
That must have been the first time, right?
Yeah. And she was going through kind of a hard time, and I remember being kind of emotional for us too, seeing these stories firsthand, and then wanting to like really kind of like start to help her more, because it was initially what was really just trying to reveal more systematic issues and really trying to look at it from more of an academic standpoint. It became kind of a more personalized story, like you said.
Yeah.
And it just made sense then to kind of follow her, and I think we had talked about then like wanting to get to know her as a person more, and her background. Yeah, and that was always the part of the movie that I liked the best. But then there was also other elements of it too that were pretty cool, like the different, like, obviously the academic stuff is interesting, and that's kind of, I think that's what a lot of the screenings that we went to recently, they kind of gravitate towards that side of it. Yeah.
And then there's also the undercover stuff that we did.
Yeah.
Which freaked me out a bit, but ultimately really, I think that's what appealed to a lot of people that watch the movie.
Yeah.
I always get feedback that part is pretty interesting, so.
And I liked how we complemented each other in that, and we were able to bring that together. And so, it kind of went from, so we had Vaky then, and then we got to know her story. We brought in all the stuff that we thought about, looking at from academic standpoints, quote unquote, looking at policies, doing interviews with government officials and academics and so forth. And then when we wrapped it all together, it was like, okay, we're so far into this now. Vaky has a story, but we want to continue to tell it. Like, how do we bring it back to a standpoint of which we can understand her background even more thoroughly, and I think understand even more root causes that are connecting to the issues that we saw in Taiwan. And I think at that point is when we decided to do the Kickstarter.
Right. To go to the Philippines.
Yeah, because we want to go to the Philippines and start from where she got hired, and then trace kind of like, through her broker and so forth. So we started a Kickstarter campaign. We launched it. I think we were trying to get $7,000 in funding.
I think it was maybe 10. Was it 10 or 7?
I think it was 7. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I think at the end we were like, oh, we should have went for 5.
Yeah.
7 was perhaps a little bit too high.
Yeah, I think we only got up to like 4 or 5, right?
Yeah, like 3. We were about halfway. That's what I remember.
Yeah.
And it was really weird. It came at a time where that fishing boat accident happened, where those fishermen.
Yeah.
And like we saw those numbers go down. We saw people withdraw money.
I didn't know that actually.
Yeah. The numbers actually went down, and we saw people like withdrawing. I remember that very clearly, going, "Oh wow, this is 100% connected to this." And
right.
I think there was some other incident too that happened. I can't remember what it was, but then we had one major donor come through.
It was like, I remember that fishing boat thing was like the day after we launched.
Yeah, it was like
really crazy. It was like, oh, are you kidding me?
And like now everyone has to be sympathetic towards Filipinos and migrants. Everyone was just so upset in Taiwan, and then we had all those people like the media picked up on it, but then they started doing all those publications, and meanwhile it was on top of all this other news where they're talking about like how bad the relationship with the Philippines became.
Yeah,
I was like, oh crazy. My goodness.
Yeah, and there was like a news story like every other day about like, Taiwanese guy beats up a Filipino, or Filipino beats up a Taiwanese guy. It's like, oh Jesus.
Yeah, bad timing, man. So the campaigns, we had this major donor come through. In Kickstarter, if you don't reach it's not like if anyone is thinking about doing a campaign, don't use Kickstarter as a sign on. Use Indiegogo or GoFundMe, because unlike Kickstarter, those two projects, if you don't reach your maximum or your set goal, Kickstarter, the way that Kickstarter works is that it doesn't give you anything. Yeah. Whereas with Indiegogo, it gives you that money, but it takes a larger percentage out at the end, something like 10% or something.
Yeah, so I guess the benefit is they take a smaller percentage of Kickstarter.
Yeah, if you reach it, the full amount.
Yeah.
So then technically by the end we had no money, so we had to reach out to those individual donors and say like, okay, look, we're still serious about doing this project. Yeah. We want to make it. We had an outline, our whole, we had a nice trailer put together, a nice page, and we're like, okay, please, still support us, because we should know too. Okay, so at this point, you and I have been doing this thoroughly, for about a year and a half.
Yeah, it was close to a year and a half at that point.
Now, mind you, anyone who's listening, Nick and I had pretty much dedicated every single Sunday morning.
Yeah, a lot of time.
Yeah, and Tuesday mornings.
Yeah, that was our. Yeah, we would meet. We would meet on Tuesday and have a meeting about it, and then we would usually do filming and stuff on Sunday.
Yeah, so we were pretty serious. We spent a lot of time putting into it, and when we take into consideration all the other stuff that we were putting on the side, we're like, oh, okay, and we were spending a lot of money on taxis, on buses, whatever, and it's it really became. I don't want to say a struggle per se, but it was really getting to the point where it was we can't keep doing all of this out of pocket.
Yeah.
And especially if we're going to fly abroad, we at least need some kind of help, and how far, can we do this? So.
Well, yeah.
But we had a donor come through. I think within the end, what originally was $3,500, we ended up getting something like $1,700. I think we were only really able to to get back about half of that. But it was enough to basically book us a hotel for a week, get us our plane tickets. We got some.
Yeah, the plane ticket and the hotel, and then that was about it.
Yeah.
But it was enough of an incentive when you have no money. When you get some money, you're like, okay, I guess I got to do this now.
Yeah, exactly. And we wanted to. I really wanted to do it too. I was really committed at that point. I really wanted to see it through. I felt, just being living in Taipei and always seeing the migrants and meeting more of their struggles. It just meant a lot to me. So we went over there, and that was a pretty interesting experience. We basically tracked down Vaky's broker, and we met with her family as well. Which was a very emotional experience too.
Yeah, that was a really interesting time.
Just because we wanted to understand, what kind of an environment, does a migrant come from in the Philippines, and talk with their family members, getting their feedback. And we have that footage in the film where they're talking about, her experience and so forth. And then we go to these brokers, and you and I had we did the undercover stuff quite a bit there.
Yeah. That was That was done with an iPhone, and like there's an app you can download where it's like recording, but it looks like your phone is like on regular, like it has like a regular screen for it.
Right.
So I use that, and works pretty well actually. I was really nervous about it, but it's very.
I remember going into every single scene. You're like, okay, man.
Yeah, I had to like psych myself up for it because it's like, well, it's a little scary. Like, You're in the Philippines. I have no idea what's going to happen in the Philippines. Like, say they find out you're spy filming them in the Philippines.
I know.
Like, oh boy.
Yeah, looking back, I was like, that was. We threw ourselves out there.
Yeah, I don't see there's any way they wouldn't have really known, but it's like we were smart enough about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely a little bit of a risk.
Yeah, and that's why we had to come that crappy footage. I mean, it was good enough, right? We captured it. And
yeah.
I liked it because like you'd always have those shirts with the pockets in there.
Yeah, I just put it in my shirt pocket, and then it would film from there. And then every once in a while, the problem I think was the audio mostly. It was really hard to get good audio because we didn't have like a spy microphone.
But didn't we turn the audio on in the backpack or something?
Yeah, the audio was that. But the thing is that actually the audio on the phone was better than the audio from the recorder most of the time.
Oh.
Because the audio from the recorder, I couldn't really expose the mic enough to get the sound, and so it was just it didn't really pick up as well. So most of the time I just used the audio from the actual phone because that was more like closer to them anyway. So
yeah.
So that was a little bit of a technical challenge, was getting good audio in a spy situation. I don't know how you do that.
Yeah, I've heard of some cameras where they put them like in backpacks and so forth. They're like, or they look like buttons. So people put them like on their shirts. But I think at that point, like those were like really expensive. We don't want to spend the money on them and stuff.
Well, and I actually made like a makeshift one, but it wasn't. It was way more conspicuous than like just using the phone because everybody has a phone. So. Right. So like, and if you get caught with like a spy camera setup, then you're really fucked. But if you get caught with a phone, you're like, what's this my phone?
Exactly. And like I said, like you said, like the lights aren't flashing on it. It doesn't even look like it's turned on. And hey, I just like putting my phone in my shirt pocket.
Yeah, exactly. I always do that.
Yeah. So, and the reason why we had to do it that way is because we knew that no one would open up. Someone's buzzing up. No one would openly talk about how they're essentially telling lies to migrants.
Yeah, nobody's gonna do that in a real interview.
And we should explain a little bit about that, like the nature of of what is actually happening when they're telling us. So to kind of recap, okay, so when you go to a broker, and we emphasize this a lot in the film about the issues, where a lot of the issues are arising for migrants wanting to run away in the first place, is that you essentially have they're a company, right? And when you're a company, you have a product or you have a service. Now, what is a product in this case? Well, it's a human being. It's a worker. Mm-hmm. And you have these brokers really trying to compete with one another, just saying, well, no, my product is better than yours, and then we have this, and you're really trying to promote it. And so what happens though is that when you're trying to do that, you're essentially you're telling the purchaser, that is essentially the employer who's going to be hiring this person to work in their house or in the factory and so forth, telling them, well, no, this person can work in this many hours. They can do this. They can cook. They can clean. They can shop. They can do everything. And so they're kind of promoting it. And in the meantime, there's not a lot of overall government oversight that's happening. Or if there is, when we interviewed them, they're doing audits. They would leave out a huge amount of information, or they wouldn't really to oversee every single employer and all that. It became too difficult. So trying to figure out then, okay, where this problem was arising from. And then we knew that, okay, if we were going to go to ask a broker, and that's what we did. We pretended like we were interested in getting our own Filipino worker. That was the catch.
Pretty clever.
Yeah, that was... we went in there, and so what we did was like, okay, we're going to be opening this company in Taiwan. I think we said we were going to open a restaurant or something.
Yeah, I think it was a restaurant because that was... I think you picked that, because isn't it one of the things that they're not allowed to actually do?
Yes, they're technically not allowed to be working like in restaurants. Because there's no one. It's out of the framework of the things they can do. You're in the factory, you're in the household, and then there are some exceptions. I think sometimes, but they're few and far in between. But typically, if you do see like a Filipino or a Thai like working at a restaurant with the Taiwanese, they're there illegally, so to speak. So. But they got in, but they came in through legal framework through, say for example, as a migrant working in a household, and they say, at night go work at this restaurant, which is what happened with Vaky. Vaky's whole port was talking about how she'd be cooking and cleaning at like 5 a.m. all the way throughout the day, and then she had to go to that shabu shabu place, remember?
Yeah, work at night.
Work at night, and so she'd be there till like clean up like 2 a.m. Then she said she would just sleep a few hours and the process would work over again. So we wanted to see if we could capture that firsthand and see if they would reveal us to that. And basically what they did, both on the Taiwan side and on the Filipino side, was like,
yeah, whatever you want. It's all good. Basically, any kind of requests we had, they were like, it's fine, just do that. And just, I think it's interesting what they said too. The thing that stuck with me is when she said like, we'll find you somebody who wants to do that.
Right. Yeah.
But then, all of the migrants that we talked to, they all were like, no, we didn't want to do that. We weren't told that we were doing that.
Exactly, and that was the discrepancy. Okay, what I was told originally from the broker, in terms of working for a family for this X amount of hours, was completely different by the time I got to the home country, that is Taiwan.
Yeah.
And so I had this expectation, the employer had this expectation. Where was the miscommunication coming from?
Well, it had to be the broker.
It had to be the broker. So then we had to, figure out then where that was coming through. Then we connected all the dots between all, loopholes and the system, the oversight, and then we found to be equally as bad, really, between the sending countries, which in this case would be the Philippines, and the receiving country, which would be Taiwan. And I think like a lot of people really wanted to just like talk about like how shitty like Taiwanese people are supposedly. And I think you and I were very reserved about that because we didn't necessarily think like Taiwanese were just overall racist people who just had it in for migrants.
That wasn't the point of the movie.
That wasn't the point of the movie at all. And although I think like it was interesting, like during some of the screenings, I think like some people like really wanted to take away that from the movie. Like,
for sure. I think a lot of people. I think anytime you make a political, semi-political movie, even though it's not really.
Yeah.
I mean, you could say it's political, I guess. But everybody kind of then puts their own agenda.
Yeah.
On like, what do I want to use this for? What point do I want to kind of get across?
Right.
Which, is a little bit, and it's interesting to see even if you make the movie and you kind of have your own message that you get across through the way that you create the movie. Like it's interesting to see how people can still kind of manipulate your message a little bit.
That was I know, and I've heard about that, and like you and I just to see that like unfold firsthand experience was just like every screening. Thank you anyone who's held us hold of screening and so forth.
Like, we're not complaining about screenings at all.
No, but like the different types of people like you mentioned that would show up and want to throw their own agenda and like twist into some other way.
Or like leading questions from like when you take questions from the crowd and they give you kind of like a leading question where I feel like as foreigners in Taiwan, you have to be very careful. I don't know if they're doing it on purpose or if they don't know, but sometimes they'll ask you questions of like, so don't you think like the Taiwanese government is totally terrible? And you're like, that's like a simple example, but like, and you're like kind of like, no, that's not. You're kind of. What are you trying to? Are you trying to like entrap me? To like that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think we tried really hard to take this middle ground and go, okay, let's try to look at this as objectively as possible. Where we saw the problems stemming from was this essentially broken system. And then ultimately, I think where we got maybe where I got more critical than if I want to talk politically was that the category of runaway workers essentially exists because Taiwan doesn't allow migrants to change employers freely.
Yeah.
Like by default, if you come here as a migrant, you have to like leave again. You have to go through the broker. You can't just say, "Well, you know what? I don't like this job. I want to change. I want to switch." And like any other foreigner could do, like you or I. So if they're in this position where they're getting overworked, they're getting abused, and what do you do? Well, they reach this point where they feel helpless and they can't technically leave. Otherwise, they get fined a ton of money. It's in their contracts. The brokers take advantage of them in that sense. So they say, "Screw it! Like I'm running away." And like by default, Taiwan then has to have this huge population of runaways,
right?
Of which then has to have all this oversight, and then it goes into like they start working illegally in other areas like massage parlors, and mainly just because they have to go pay off their debts,
right?
And it becomes just like this cycle, and one of which can easily be resolved should they take not even so much broker oversight, but if they just even amended some rules that essentially would influence brokers to have to change their ways, period. Because if they allowed that, then they would say like, no, brokers couldn't just say all that stuff to their customers, employers, because they know that then the migrant worker would be likely to leave should they be subjected to such like overwork and stuff.
Right. Then they can change their job. And
right.
That's kind of the problem, is that there's not there's no agency for the worker in the situation. All the power is in the hand of, I think one of the NGOs we talked to kind of talked about this. Yeah. All the powers, and if all the power is in the hands of the employer, then what's the worker gonna do? They can't do anything.
Can't do anything.
The only thing they can do is run away. That's their only kind of small power that they have. Right. And then that puts them in a category of being illegal.
Exactly. So. And when for those who don't know, when they come over too, they have like an insane amount of broker fees that they have to pay too. And I'm for me, like when you go to the Philippines or these other countries, like you have to realize too, like brokers don't necessarily have to be like a terrible thing. Like they can be this, when you go to like see some of these workers, they've never touched a computer before.
Yeah.
There's no way for them to have like gone on a line to like figured out all the visa work and how to get into Taiwan. They literally are from a whole different part of the world that is not up to par. And so I'm not against the idea. Like I've gone through brokers like when I lived in China, like that would hook me up with different cases, and I had to pay them like a first paycheck or something like this, and I was totally happy to do it. And I feel like they could be using brokers to their advantage to help this free, this transfer of labor across the world. But what happens is that they have all this fine writing about monthly fees and all this stuff and all this stuff to buy, and it eats up like a third of their paycheck like every month.
Yeah, it's like indentured servitude, sort of.
Yeah.
And it's not really. Yeah, it's not cool.
Yeah, and that's one of those things too, where like oversight, like the government could step in and say, okay, well, brokers, you do have to realize as part of a labor policy that there should be a limitation in terms of like taxes per se, like a percent.
Oh, for sure.
Like in this sense, the amount of fees you can collect and so forth, and there should definitely be some amendments towards that. And so I think we do mention that in the film. We do mention, like we just mentioned, the the runaway category and how it's essentially created by itself as a result. But one of these big issues too that kind of goes beyond this too is once you're a migrant worker in Taiwan or in Korea or in any of these places, like you're living at home, right? You're living and working at home, and because they don't live in separate, most of the time they don't live in separate homes. So if you're someone who's living next in the room and you're just always there, once it hits 7, 8 p.m. they still think, well, hey, so and so, come on, I need help with this. And
right, exactly.
It's like it's almost impossible to like escape the nature of work, and that's one of the things too that like a lot of the academics talked about too.
That's another pretty big issue.
Yeah, it was just how do you resolve the issue of just being in the house, and yet it's I can understand like living in Taiwan too, that dynamic of like, well, you're there, like why can't you help out?
Well, the way that I think about it now too is like I started working freelance like on my own. I was working out of my house for a while, and I realized two things happen is you screw off a little bit more because you're in your home, so you're thinking like, oh, I can kind of relax. But the other thing happened is I would get off work way later because I'm in my workspace too. Like I don't think it's necessarily like a malicious thing from the side of the families that have the people living there, but it's right. Like you have a worker at your house, you think of that as a work relationship. They're there, you're cooking dinner. Hey, can you help me with the dinner?
Right.
It's your job.
Yeah.
And when do you say, no, it's 6 o'clock, I'm off work right now? Like, how do you do that if you're also you're kind of part of the family? Like, these lines get blurred, and it's kind of just like a natural thing.
Yeah.
And
my whole plea to that too, and was that, again, you take it, let's reverse all the way back. You come back to these basic laws of which you have not only just increased but better oversight, of which you establish very clear rules for brokers that they cannot overcharge, that then they change the laws related to what does it mean to actually constitute as a runaway.
Yeah.
And so you make it so that they have this freedom to switch employers given certain circumstances. And by the way, they could do that now, but they have to provide proof of like being abused and so forth. But what happens though, like even Vaky was mentioning, she's like, but my employer like took my phone and I can't even record. Even if I like were to capture him doing something really weird, it'd be awkward, first of all, to me holding up a phone and recording it. But you know, I don't even have that because my phone was taken away.
Put it in your pocket.
Yeah, so like if migrants, if you're listening, you have to do it like in the spyway then. And then after you get that, you have to find a way then to like leave the house and like submit it somehow. How do you get like footage off of that? You know, do you put it like on the social media, or what do you do with that afterwards? You know, and it just like it becomes this like huge process for them. So
yeah.
Point being is that with some really simple amendments, I think it would have this kind of this long-term effect. I don't know what you call it, like this rippling effect, where like from the core. Some amendments to some basic laws and stuff that I think it would influence the brokers. I think the relationship then between the employers would vastly improve as well.
Yeah.
And I think they would just realize too, like, you know, like other companies, once that's in place, because when you see that like at other companies too, yeah, they do work overtime and so forth, and some companies really, you know, can be taken advantage too in many ways. But overall, the environment and the nature of it has changed a lot. It's much different, and so. You know, people don't like it, they're free to go. So, but we've, you know, so kind of wrapping that back up to when we went to the Philippines. So we saw that happening there as well, and then we brought it back. I think we came back then to Taiwan afterwards, right?
Yep.
And then I'm trying to think. Then was that our last stint?
That was our last film. Yeah, that was kind of put all the pieces together and filled everything out.
Yeah.
I don't think we filmed anything else after that, except I went around and filmed just like extra stuff. Like I went around and filmed like, you know, the street and like migrant worker. I remember I went around like to like all of the like hospitals and filmed outside and just got a bunch of like extra footage to kind of fill in the like during the interviews while they're talking, kind of just have some extra stuff to show.
Yeah.
But other than that was pretty much the end of the film.
Yeah. And then afterwards, I think we kind of sat down and like we started putting like a storyboard together.
Yep.
And then we were talking about like what scenes we think should go where, and then you know.
Yeah. We had a bunch of meetings about that actually, and we went through it. And I remember what I did to edit it too was we kind of broke everything down into different like sections, like okay, this interview, and then I wrote them all on Post-it notes and I just like put them up and like moved them around and said like okay, this can go here, and then I kind of roughly edited it together, showed it to you, and then we would have a conversation about like I should move this scene for that scene and put this there and maybe cut this part, add this part, stuff like that.
Yeah, and we did a lot of like emails too. Like you dropped files in like Dropbox.
That was interesting.
I was like, dude, let's add 1 second, you know, to this part, you know?
Yeah. I remember that.
I would be so anal about, you know, like transitions and stuff.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. It'd be like, can we hold for 3 seconds here? I'm like, okay.
I'm very particular about like sound and like transitions. And
right. And you did and then while I was shooting all that extra stuff, you were creating all the music.
Yeah, I did the music, yeah. And that was fun. Like I just had this like keyboard. Like I don't really like play piano much, but I like doing different synth stuff, and so I was just kind of messing around with it. And I think I had just taken some lessons at that time too, and I was just trying to figure out, okay, you know, what would go well with it. And but how long did the editing process take from that? I think that was probably the most challenging part, or one of the most. Which is
took a while. Yeah, it's you're editing together. It ended up being 70 minutes or something out of however many hours of footage. You know, it takes a long time. It's not, and you know, it's just the two of us working together to kind of create this whole big project. It took a long time. I remember.
Yeah.
I want to say like about 3 months or 4 months, because I think we basically finished shooting in September, October. 4 months.
Yeah.
4 months.
We had to be pretty disciplined too. I mean, not to like toot our own horns here, but like when you're doing like a big film, like you're trying to put together an hour-long, 70-minute piece of work, and you're not sure what the result is going to be, you have no more funding. Keep in mind.
Yeah. No.
What funding you had was meant to like pay for expenses and.
Oh yeah, no. I would do this after I got off work. So it was like I get off work and then I go home and I'd edit until like a God, I don't even remember what time, like 3 a.m. And I'd just be like, ugh. And then like, I remember too, I would do like all weekend sessions where I would just edit through the footage for like the whole weekend. I was just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
It was pretty intense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, do you want to talk about the first screening?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was
So that was kind of part of the process of...
Nick and I basically wanted to kill each other by this point.
Yeah, it was pretty rough. Well,
No.
The thing that had happened was we had our first screening, and we had a bunch of edits that needed to be done, and then my computer fucked up while I was exporting the final edit. Also, I didn't have time to... we had got somebody to translate the subtitles,
right,
and she had just given it back to us like the day before, almost. It was like it had gone really close. So I was trying to put in all the subtitles for the movie in one day, and if you've ever put in subtitles, like that takes fucking forever.
Yeah.
And I got maybe, it's a 70-minute movie, so it was taking a long time, and I had gotten halfway through, and it was like 5 a.m, and the screening was at 5 p.m.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, I gotta stop.
Yeah.
And I started to export it, and my computer was like, this is gonna take 48 hours. I was just like, oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So I was freaking out, to say the least. And so I was trying to think, I tried to figure out all these different ways that I could show the edited one, but basically what happened was there was just no way.
Yeah.
So I had to thankfully I had edited a rough cut,
Right,
that I had on a drive already,
yeah,
that we had used to test the screening room. And so I ended up showing that. But the problem with that is I was missing a couple shots. A lot of shots actually.
Yeah.
And it didn't have any subtitles, which
Right.
was a big problem. So.
Yeah, because we were doing it in Taiwan, and we had a lot of non-native, speakers of English.
Well, both. We had the problem. I think the
that's
problem
right,
was
actually,
it's the film is in Chinese and English.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And then we had English speakers in the audience, but then also Chinese speakers in the audience. So basically, the two different kinds of people could only understand half the movie.
So it happened. Okay, so yeah, then show up like we were like oh fuck, dude, what the what's going on, man? Fuck, just like
You're freaking out.
We're freaking out. Like, dude, you're being a dick. Stop.
Well, I mean, fair enough.
Yeah, and
it was pretty tough. And I had been up the whole night too, so I had no sleep. So obviously, I'm not in a great mood. And you're not in a great mood either, because it's a big deal. We had this screening set up. You basically had set up that screening, and technical problems caused it to not go as good as it should have.
Well, because what happened, so then we put the rough cut up, and then so I was on the mic, remember?
Yep, yeah.
I was on the side, so we had about 100.
I will never forget this.
We had
a lot of people.
That was our biggest screen, I think, till date. Was that one, and word got out because it was right as it was finished. A lot of reporters got a hold of it.
Yeah.
I remember that the Taiwan reporter guy, Klaus.
Yeah.
Shout out to him. Had posted it in his feed and stuff, and a lot of people had signed up. So there was well over 100. So everyone's showing up. Then so it would come to these scenes where then it'd be talking in one language, and other people didn't know what was going on. So then would pause it, and then I would do it in overdub, saying, and here's just what happened. He was explaining about the system and blah blah blah, and then we would press play again.
Yeah.
And then go through and pause and yeah.
Yeah, and then the interesting thing though I thought about that screening was how much everybody liked it, even though it wasn't a finished, it wasn't, we both had seen a newer version of it, both of us.
Yeah.
And so for us, we were like, oh, this is a huge failure. We're showing a not good version of our movie, that we had worked really hard on, and we knew, in our minds, we knew what the better product could be.
Right.
But all the people there had never seen it before, and so they were just seeing it for the first time. So for them, they were like, oh wow, this is really interesting. And I just remember getting a lot of positive feedback from that screening, from almost everybody.
Yeah.
Despite the kind of technical problem of it, which it sucked because we obviously wanted to show something even better. But
Oops，嘿，嘿，我们在录音，没关系，可以，可以，可以，我们对，所以
先帮我进去，马上下去。
OK， 好，没关系，没关系，
没关系。
哎，不好意思，我好朋友叫你好。
上次新闻都有看过。
我们就是拍过那个纪录片的，我们在录音那个对一个对话。
早餐吃了没？
有，都吃了。我等一下下去。好，你需要这个房间吗？哦，应该还没。
我是住这间。
OK， 好。OK。
我等一下煮饭那个。
哦 ，OK， 好。
对。
好，谢谢。
下午煎干贝好吧？
哦，可以。好，谢谢。All right. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So the feedback is that.
Yeah. So everybody seemed to.
You're right, and like, cause the Taipei community, everyone who came was really cool, right? Like, we met a lot of the people, and they were very forgiving. So I think it's just the pressure that we gave each other was.
Well, yeah, you want it to be. I mean, you want to create the best thing you can. So.
Yeah, and my parents had just flown in like the night before, and I was like, oh, I gotta show them what I've been doing and prove it to them. So, but in hindsight, I mean, it all worked out. I think afterwards we had gotten the finished product done.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, actually, because we didn't release it on YouTube till that August.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out what was it then. I think you and I both got like bogged down with some different projects right at that point.
Yeah, and then we had submitted it to a couple film festivals first to see kind of how it would go, and then
because we didn't want to put it on YouTube right away because otherwise
then you get excluded from some festivals if you do that. So I mean we had a discussion about the best way to do it, and I think what our kind of compromise was we were like, okay, we'll submit it and we'll see how many it gets into and see how it goes. If it doesn't, then we'll just put it on YouTube. And ultimately, at the end, when we put it on YouTube, that ended up being the most exposure we got from it was putting it on YouTube.
Yeah.
And the festival thing didn't really work out.
Well, it's funny, like, because we got into so many other festivals and screenings, but it's because they
saw it on YouTube.
Well, yeah, and they came to us. Yeah,
exactly.
Like they invited, like the ones that we applied to, we just had no luck. It was like bigger festivals, and but in hindsight, just putting a piece of work out for free. In hindsight, was the best move because then it attracted all these other screenings.
Yeah, because I think the thing about this movie is that it gets a lot of. It's a very local kind of issue. Yeah. So I remember we submitted to a lot of kind of international kind of places, but they didn't really have the perspective on it, so maybe they weren't really interested in it. But all of the film festivals that we got into were local Taiwan festivals that approached us,
right?
Because they were like, "Oh, we care about this issue." Mm-hmm. So, like the International Labor Festival was one. Right. What were some other ones?
Oh man, I think we've been to like almost a dozen when I was counting them up.
We screened at the Sunflower Protest.
The Sunflower Protest we got invited to. Actually, the other one was part of a TEDx, some kind of event. I don't remember the exact name.
Yeah, that was when I was gone.
Yeah, there's some other private screenings that people just did at like their departments. So NCCU did one.
Yeah, schools.
A few other schools, and
there was one in like a museum.
Yeah, that one too. Yeah, and you were going to Hawaii, I think, the next day too. So
I left like right after. Yeah, I think I want to say it was the same day.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, we sort of got it going. I remember. Yeah, so it was. Yeah, exactly. There was that one and that museum. I can't remember what the name of that museum was, but it had to do with that protester who essentially burnt himself alive in his home, and heavy vibe over there.
Yeah, that was an intense one. Yeah, there was. I remember we screened it like to the side of the project, like where it was projected. There's like this like statue of a guy burning himself alive. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah. That screening in particular was one of the smaller ones, but it was very interesting because a famous lawmaker, and I'm forgetting the name. I'm just drawing blanks, staying on names, but she's the daughter of some other famous politician in Taiwan. You see her on the news all the time, actually, and she had came. I didn't know who she was at the time, but she was also a lawyer. And it got me kind of down because, like, I talked to her afterwards, and she's like, "Oh, I'm a lawyer," and blah blah blah. And all this. She's like, "Yeah, this whole topic is very, very complicated because of X, Y, and Z, you know, these laws and so forth. And she's just like, you know, but I really appreciate what you guys are doing for this. She didn't really give me like a really good.
She was kind of like good job, but this will never happen, kind of a
type
vibe.
thing, yeah. And I didn't really want to until now. Like I don't want to say like I don't believe it, but like the attitude of it was really dismal. In that like I feel like given all that we've shown to you, like you can see very clearly where some very basic things are coming from, and what small changes can make, you know, an influence. It just felt like so. Yeah, well, you know, who do you think you? There's also some kind of like resentment towards it a little bit as well.
Like, yeah, you don't know what I know, kind of a vibe.
Yeah, lawyer, I know everything type thing. So, but there was that, and as time went on too, then we got invited to do a lot of like press. So we got interviewed by the Taiwan, what was it called? Remember that magazine that we got into?
Yeah, I don't. We got a couple, so
yeah,
there was a few. We got a few articles in newspapers and magazines.
Yeah,
I know the magazine you're talking about, but I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah, it's called Ijokon, I believe.
Okay, cool.
And a number of different like college papers got interviewed us and so forth, and I think a few other publications did as well. We have it all. If you just type in the name of the film, you'll see all that stuff. But
yeah, it all pops up.
Yeah. Point being is that since then, aside from the screenings, we've gotten a lot of inquiries, questions, and then after doing all those screenings, like we got to a point to where about actually this time, literally 1 year ago, was about the time when I was moving back to the States, and we were kind of just like putting it to, like we kind of reached a point where like, okay, we've done all we can do. We kept emphasizing this idea of planting seeds and just trying to let the film take its natural course. But I think you were also gone at this point too, but I remember getting an invite from Freddie Lim. He had just gotten elected into the government,
right.
And he was part of this whole new progressive party and so forth. And I figured, oh man, like if there's one last chance where we can have a politician kind of open up and talk about the benefits, have someone that could maybe really fight for this topic, it would be him. I think there's one over there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I know, is that
the nearest one?
I think so. Yeah.
We're looking for an outlet right now.
That's what that's soon. So I went there on our behalf, and I gotta say, so literally 1 year, March of 2016, right now it's end of March here, 2017. The way I proposed it to Freddie Lim was because it's very hard for Taiwanese, I found, in some cases, to sympathize with some of these workers, given the fact that what they think that they're not really necessarily doing anything wrong, given what the brokers told them, right?
Yeah. So
they can't really feel like guilty, and we don't want to make them feel ashamed. That wasn't our point at all. And but the way I presented to him was like, okay, if you present legislation in that we have this category of migrant workers, they can be changed, they can be prevented or even completely avoided in many cases, and all the oversight that goes into it, all the government spending that goes into it can be decreased and or almost completely avoided as well. Mm-hmm. If you pitch it that way, lawmakers may see a reason to want to switch things up. Mm-hmm. And he thought that'd be the best way to do it too, just because there has to be some kind of benefit for the Taiwan government. Which is interesting. You would think like at this point, like given if they would watch the film or if they would see the other stuff that's going on, like you would see the benefit in it otherwise. But for some reason, it wasn't clicking with a lot of like lawmakers to see the benefit of. Again, I think they still had this mindset, just like, well, migrant workers, they run away. Migrant workers are just these runaway types. They're just kind of loud and noisy.
Yeah, it's just gonna happen.
It's just gonna happen, and so we've been constantly up against that kind of a wall, trying to explain, and really wanting to help shed new light onto the topic that way. And honestly, since having that discussion with Freddie Lim, I have not seen really anything new happen from that. There was a law recently that got passed, which I was super happy about, was that a migrant no longer has to leave every 3 years. It has to check back in.
That's a big thing.
It is, and for those who don't maybe know why, it has to do with the fact that every 3 years, technically, for the migrant to continue their contracts, is that they have to leave, come back in. They basically have to repay the same broker fees and the monthly fees that kind of keep them behind, that don't really allow them to go and get ahead and save money and so forth. So it becomes this financial burden that they have to keep undertaking. And so in many cases, like, they have to come back because they still haven't paid off past debts either. So it's kind of like one of these things where you just get locked into it and you can't get out. So the government got rid of this rule that you have to go back every 3 years. You can just continue paying.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a lot of other cases too where, like, the government just seems to be talking about the topic a lot more, I've noticed. And I've had a lot of feedback from Taiwanese in general saying, for some reason, like, and it's not, we shouldn't take all credit for it, obviously, but since the film has been out, it seems like things are just changing. They're kind of progressing. And I think when you do throw something out there in the open, people can view it. I think people's mindsets just start changing, and the environment starts paying more attention to things, and people start talking with one another and saying, hey, did you see this? Did you hear about this? And so forth. And then with all the kind of interactions I think we've had with, during the screenings, I think I feel like things are still progressing forward.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I think the screenings that I went to, it's funny, we only went to a few screenings together.
Yeah.
We're in the country at separate times, but the screening that I went to, a couple that I did, the conversation seemed really positive. Everybody, it was with NGOs that were working towards this issue, but they seemed like they were making progress every time. So it's, I think anything like this, whatever we think is a simple fix, it's not really to when you're dealing with like a government kind of thing. It's just there's a lot that goes into it. Like, so any kind of little victories you can get in this is pretty cool.
Yeah, totally. And one thing that comes to mind too, someone asked us like why we didn't interview. That was another common question, like why we didn't interview people like migrant workers who had like positive experiences.
Right.
And we were like, well, we tried. We didn't go out of our way, like.
Well, yeah, that's a huge thing. Is like we definitely tried to, and we talked to people. I remember we had a couple lined up of people. I remember there was like a friend of a friend who was like, oh, I have a migrant worker and she's super happy or whatever. But then they ended up just not connecting or not wanting to do it or whatever. It was weird.
Yeah, like we tried really hard. I remember to like get a perspective, like what makes like a migrant happy then, here, what to stay in. Man, we just couldn't find anyone. We tried really hard.
Yeah.
But since then I feel like there's more and more migrants coming now. Like I read an article recently saying that by the end of 2016 there's over 600,000 migrants now between the household sector and the factory segment, and like the fishing boats and so forth. And now by the end of first quarter of 2017, there's already 625,000.
Wow.
And yeah, that's a lot of an island of 23 million people. I mean,
that's a huge part of the population. So.
Yeah, and so Taiwan is in this very interesting place now where I think it's like arguably the most diverse country within Southeast East Asia.
It seems like it,
but yet it's not like naturally feeling diverse. It's like it's here. The diversity here is here. There's so many Vietnamese, Thai, Filipinos, and so forth. But it's like they're all just kind of on the sidelines somehow, like looking in.
Yeah, I would say that. It's probably true.
It's just like it's not integrating into this real dynamic of being really truly diverse. In that, it's just kind of like the migrants show up on Sunday evening, Sunday afternoons to meet, and then. When the garbage comes through, the garbage trucks, then they're gone. They just kind of disappear. It's not like this flowing of different faces of all different kinds on an everyday basis.
Right.
But it's like that number is increasing very fast. And I've been recently going to all these different factories for, just for work and so forth. And I've met with all these factories, bosses, and they're saying, yeah, like we still have any labor here, and like Taiwanese don't want to do this kind of work, so they're just like trying to push governments to get more labor into here, and they think that like a lot of people from Myanmar are going to start coming in.
Yeah.
Cambodia maybe even, but a lot of Vietnamese, and they're already like worried that like Vietnam's economy is going really really fast right now, and they're expecting Filipinos aren't coming anymore, so they think like they're going to have a huge labor shortage in like 10 years down the road.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Of like that the jobs are there, it's just nobody wants to do them.
Yeah, And it's like, and if you look at too, so wrapping back to like, one of the things that I was trying to also push into, with Freddie Lim was that like, look at the benefit then from the economy standpoint too. Like, you create this diverse area, this internationally competitive arena where you can provide different forms of labor and things that really help make Taiwan strong, especially in areas where like Taiwanese don't want to do the work themselves. So the investment into really making sure that everyone is taken care of properly and done so in a rightful way is like really important from the Taiwan standpoint.
Oh yeah, of course.
That's how I see it too. Like, it wasn't so much of a blaming time. Like, it's supposed to be like looking at the benefit for everyone.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think something that you and I talked about, and I think something that people should think about is like, why are quote unquote white collar workers treated so much better than blue collar workers? Like, what's the stigma that people have against blue collar work? Like, that's a skill that people have they're willing to do this type of work, and they're helping your community. They're contributing to the society by doing these kinds of jobs just as much as a white collar worker is. But a white collar worker gets treated with so much more respect and kind of leniency, and they're wanted here. Jobs are like seeking out good foreign talent. So why is that the case? But then on the other hand, nobody's doing the same for like blue collar jobs.
Right.
There's a kind of a stigma against it. Kind of people think maybe, oh, anybody can do that. We can get anybody to do it, so we'll just kind of use them and throw them away, and that'll be that.
Yeah.
But I think people need to. There just needs to be a shift in thinking about these blue collar people are valuable to our society.
Yeah. And too, like, I've seen a lot of different, like, Filipinos and Vietnamese and Indonesians, a lot of Indonesians here as well. And it's tough, man. Like, there's racial tension anywhere you go in the world. And it exists here, too. And, like, I was at a restaurant recently, and they came in, and I have to say, like, the Indonesians that came in, they were kind of noisy. They were just, like, put the can I get the table here? Okay, just like really loud and stuff. And I see like the Taiwanese just kind of look at them. And I kind of feel like you can just feel the tension like boil up in the room, you know. And it's like both sides just need to like look at people for their actions and try to take like the skin color, try to take
because that could I've seen that same scene happen with a group of young Taiwanese kids coming into a place and acting in a crappy way.
Yeah.
And people don't say like, oh. If you're in Taiwan, Taiwanese people aren't going to say, oh, Taiwanese people are so annoying. They say, oh, those kids are so annoying.
Right.
It's like if a bunch of Indonesians come into a place and they're acting not cool, it's like you don't say, oh, this is all Indonesians are this way.
Yeah.
It's...
And that's kind of, unfortunately, if I had to pose some criticism, here, that would be my biggest kind of beef.
Well, but I don't even think that's necessarily a criticism of Taiwan. I think that's a criticism of human nature.
Oh, absolutely.
The same thing happens everywhere in the world. If you have another race come in, all of a sudden you're stereotyping them. That's kind of what happens.
Exactly. So in that sense, like you said, it's not just a Taiwan issue. It's if I had an idealistic wish, it'd be that you'd be judged on the content of your character. That person's fucking annoying, but it has nothing to do with them being Indonesian,
Exactly. They're annoying in a different language though, so for some reason it's like it's a little bit more abrasive. I don't know.
Yeah. So
I mean, I get this. I feel that way too in Taiwan. If a bunch of white people come into a room, I mean, it's even worse. It's even worse for me because then I'm just like, why are you behaving this way?
Do you get tense, like really ashamed too? Like,
of course. I feel a lot of shame. So much shame.
I feel so bad. I'm like, you're ruining years of experience where I'm trying to be so polite to everyone and create this good image of foreigners, And it's now just all out the window.
Yeah. And now they probably think I know you and
one of them. So so that's kind of it. I don't know. If we missed anything.
No, we're about 1 hour right now. Do we have anything else that we wanted to go over?
I think we covered the basis.
Cool.
Start from the beginning all the way through, and I think just from here on, man. I think you and I are pretty neutral on just what's going to happen with the film. I think from here on out, we're just going to let it do its thing. And
I mean, it's on YouTube. I think it's doing its job there, and it's been screened at a bunch of places. A lot of people have seen it. We're open to any new screenings whenever they come up, and I think we're both willing to talk about the issue with a lot of people. I think the film is a good conversation starter. I think that's kind of been its I think like you said, it's like we don't pretend like we created this change in the society, but I think at the same time it's one of the, there's a reason that it keeps getting called back however many years, 2 years down the road to these different screenings, is because it's one of the only things out there that talks about this in the way that it talks about it.
Right.
And so people want to see it because it's there and it helps start the conversation, and it's
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So, on that note, that's
cool. Well, why don't we all end by saying like what are you up to these days?
Yeah. So I'm doing a website now called Chief of Life, so QIFULLIFE.com, and it has nothing to do with this topic, but it has all to do with stuff I've learned in China and Taiwan related to like Chinese medical concepts, and like related to how I was really sick in Taiwan for many years. I just could never get better. Then I started learning like Qigong and meditation and all this kind of stuff. So basically it's kind of a rundown about all these techniques that I've learned and how they've helped me throughout the years to deal with a lot of issues, and trying to present them to the public in a way that's digestible, and trying to provide these kind of alternative viewpoints into helping whether you struggle with like headaches, or you struggle with it can be depression, this type of thing. So it's meant to kind of shed a new perspective on this stuff. So I'll be launching a podcast for that soon. So check it out if you have a chance.
Nice.
And,
cool.
Yeah.
Cool, yeah, and I currently have a podcast that's very different from this called Butternut Deluxe, and you can find it on iTunes. It's like a comedy thing. We just basically screw around a lot.
It's hilarious. I love it.
A lot of swears. I'm glad you like it. And then the other stuff I do, I still do video work. I do basically freelance video stuff. So if you're interested in somebody to edit or help you out with filming, you can find me at nickvaky.com. You can see all my stuff. You can also find I Have It Made there or on YouTube, and you can watch that movie. So I do editing, animation, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, he's really good. I love Nick's work, so check it out, and keep in contact with us. If any of you have any questions, we're accessible via social media. We're both on Twitter, Facebook, and we answer pretty quickly to our Facebook page as well, though I haven't made one. So
I think we same day or next day.
Yeah, we have a high response rate.
Yeah, you can like us on Facebook. I Have It Made.
Yeah. Cheers, guys and gals. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk soon.